Welcome to your deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at all the stuff in the world of process improvement based on the notes you gave us. We're diving deep into measuring how effective a process is, how to make quality and cost actually work together, and how to cut down on wasted time and resources.
Yeah, and to really get you thinking about processes strategically, we'll be using some key concepts from scientific management and something called statistical process control, or SPC.
Ooh, statistical process control. That sounds kind of intense, but I have a feeling you're going to make it practical. I'm all about practical stuff that can actually make a real difference.
Oh, absolutely. So let's just jump right in. We'll start with a core principle of scientific management, which is measurement. The main idea is you can't truly manage something if you can't quantify it.
That makes sense.
Huh.
But isn't there a danger in just getting obsessed with numbers? Sometimes it feels like we just chase metrics without really understanding what they mean.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's not just about measuring, it's about measuring the right things. Think about it this way. Raw numbers are like ingredients without a recipe. You need ratios and comparisons to make a delicious meal.
Now you're speaking my language. I'm a terrible cook, but I get the analogy. So instead of just saying we had 20 customer complaints this month, we need to dig deeper, right?
Right. So instead you might say we had 20 complaints per 1,000 customers. That ratio gives you context and lets you compare your performance to others or to your own past performance. It's like saying this cake is too salty versus saying I used twice as much salt as the recipe called for. That's why it's so bad.
Okay, I'm starting to see how that could prevent us from making some really bad decisions based on incomplete information. It's like, remember that doctor scorecard in the UK that tried to rank physicians based on all these metrics, but ultimately just wasn't reliable?
Yeah, exactly. A single number, especially out of context, can be incredibly misleading. It's like judging a restaurant solely on the number of Yelp reviews without even reading what they say. Focus on the why behind the numbers, not just the numbers themselves.
Okay, I'm definitely going to be more critical of those online rankings now.
Yeah.
So we've talked about the importance of measuring the right things, but how do we actually make sense of all this data? How do we know when a number is a signal to take action rather than just random noise?
That's where statistical process control comes in, SPC. Think of it like this. You're roasting a turkey and you know the ideal oven temperature for a perfect bird. SPC is like having an alarm system that tells you when the temperature starts to drift outside of that ideal range.
Okay, I can see how that applies to cooking. But how does it translate to something like, say, managing a project or a team?
It's the same principle. Let's say you're tracking the number of errors in a report. Using SPC, you can set action limits. Basically, these are thresholds that trigger an investigation if the number of errors exceeds a certain point. It's like that fraud alert you get from your credit card company when a purchase falls outside of your typical spending patterns.
So instead of waiting for a total meltdown, we're being proactive and looking for early warning signs that something might be off track.
That feels a lot more empowering than constantly putting out fires.
Absolutely. And it's not about overreacting to every little blip. It's about understanding those normal fluctuations in a process and knowing when something truly warrants attention. It's like knowing that your oven temperature might fluctuate by a few degrees without ruining the turkey, but if it suddenly drops by 50 degrees, well, you've got a problem.
Okay, that's a good way to put it. So we've talked about measuring the right things and using SPC to spot those early warning signs. Now, what about this constant struggle to balance quality, cost, and time? It just feels like you can never have it all. Well, you're right. Achieving perfect quality at the lowest cost in the shortest time is, often a fantasy. It's really about making strategic choices based on your market and your specific goals.
So how do we know which factor to prioritize? Is there a magic formula?
No magic formula, unfortunately,
Yeah.
but think about the car industry. Early on, the focus was on just producing affordable vehicles. Then it shifted to quality, and now speed and delivery time are often key. The winning formula really changes over time.
So it's not just about blindly following best practices. It's about analyzing your situation and figuring out what matters most to your customers.
Yeah, exactly. And remember, even though it seems like quality always comes with a higher price tag, that's not always true.
Really. I'm always hesitant to invest in quality because I just feel like it's going to blow the budget.
It's important to look at the real cost of quality. Imagine you're building a house. If you skimp on the foundation to save money up front, you're going to have some major problems down the road that will cost you way more to fix. The same applies to any product or service.
So sometimes cutting corners actually ends up costing you more in the long run.
Exactly. Investing in things like training, good systems, and quality materials might cost more upfront, but it can save you a fortune in rework, customer complaints, and lost business later on.
This is making me rethink my whole approach to quality. It's not just a nice to have, it's a smart business decision.
Absolutely. And when you think about efficiency, there's no better place to start than reducing waste. It's like finding free money hidden in your processes.
Okay, I'm all about finding free money. Where do we even begin?
Well, we can use the acronym downtime plus one more to help us remember the 8 common types of waste.
Downtime. I love it. Already filed that away. Okay, walk me through it.
So D is for defects. Anything that doesn't meet the required standard, even if you catch a defect immediately, it still costs you money. O is overproduction, making more than you need, which leads to storage costs and potentially having to scrap excess inventory.
So it's not always about maximizing output. It's about producing the right amount at the right time.
Exactly. W is waiting. Think about how much time is wasted waiting for approvals, materials, or information. N represents underutilized talent. Are you really tapping into the full potential of your team? Are you empowering them to contribute their best ideas?
Whoa, that one hit close to home.
Yeah.
I need to think about how I can better utilize the talents of my team.
Next up, T stands for transportation, unnecessary movement of materials, products, or even information. E is for inventory, anything you're storing that isn't being actively used.
Okay, yeah, I can definitely see how excess inventory can just be a drain on resources. It's not just about the storage costs, it's about the potential for damage, obsolescence, and even theft.
Exactly. Then we have M for motion. Think about how much time and energy is wasted on unnecessary movement by people. And finally, E is excessive processing, doing more than is necessary to meet the customer's needs.
This reminds me of that saying, work smarter, not harder. It's about being intentional and eliminating steps that don't add value.
Exactly. Now, on top of those 8, there's a concept called poka-yoke, which is Japanese for mistake proofing. It's about designing processes in a way that makes errors impossible, or at least very unlikely.
Okay, I love that. It's like those safety features on power tools that prevent them from starting unless the guard is in place. It's about building quality and safety into the system from the ground up.
Exactly. So we've covered the basics of measuring effectiveness, the real cost of quality, and how to identify those sneaky types of waste. Now let's tackle another crucial factor, lead time.
Yes, lead time, the bane of my existence. It always feels like things just take longer than they should. What can we do to shorten those frustrating waiting periods?
One approach is to keep everything in stock so you can ship it out immediately.
Right.
But while that might seem like a quick fix, it can actually create some hidden costs and inefficiencies.
Wait, really? I always thought having a big inventory was a good thing. It makes you feel prepared, right?
Right. There's definitely a sense of security in having things readily available. But think about all the costs associated with storing inventory. Warehouse space, insurance, the risk of damage or theft. Plus, what happens if those items become obsolete or go out of style?
Okay, you're right. I never really considered those downsides. It's not as simple as just having things on hand.
Exactly. And having a big inventory can actually mask inefficiencies in your production process because you're not forced to address the root causes of delays. It's like having a messy closet. You just keep shoving things in there until it's overflowing instead of taking the time to declutter and organize.
Okay, that's a great analogy. So are you saying we should never keep inventory?
Not necessarily. But for anything you currently keep in stock, ask yourself this. Could we make this to order? It might cost a bit more to produce on demand, but you'd likely save money overall by not having to carry inventory.
That's a great point. It's about weighing the costs and benefits of different approaches and finding what works best for your situation.
Exactly. And whether you're making to stock or to order, the next question is, how can we shorten that lead time? Why does it take so long to deliver a product or service?
I'm all ears. I'm always looking for ways to speed things up without sacrificing quality.
Well, if you were to follow a product through its production process, you'd find that there are 4 main activities. Transferring from one stage to the next, waiting in a queue to be processed, waiting while the rest of the batch is processed, and finally the actual processing itself.
So only one of those activities actually adds value. The rest is just overhead.
Exactly. And the same applies to office environments. Think about the time it takes to get a planning application approved, or to process an invoice, or even to respond to an email. Those are all forms of lead time.
I'm starting to see lead time everywhere. It's like those hidden fees that airlines tack on after you've already booked your flight.
Yeah.
They can really add up.
Exactly. And those queues can take many forms: piles of paper on desks, emails in inboxes, even waiting lists for appointments.
So how do we tackle these queues and shorten lead times?
There are three main approaches: optimize your layout, reduce the queues at each stage, and reduce batch waiting time.
I'm ready to get tactical. Tell me more about each of these approaches.
First, optimize your layout. Make sure that transferring items or information from one stage to the next is as efficient as possible. Think about those conveyor belts in factories. They're designed to minimize the distance materials need to travel.
Okay, so it's about streamlining the physical flow of work, whether it's products moving through a factory or information moving through an office.
Right. The second approach is to reduce the queues at each stage. This could involve adding capacity, optimizing scheduling, or using techniques like bottleneck management and pull systems, which we'll talk more about later.
Okay, those sound like powerful tools. I'm intrigued to learn more about them.
And finally, reduce batch waiting time by making smaller batches. If things are constantly waiting for their turn in a large batch, it's going to add to the overall lead time. It's like being stuck in a long line at the grocery store. You might spend only a few seconds checking out, but you have to wait forever for your turn.
That's a perfect analogy. So it's not just about how fast each individual task is completed. It's also about how efficiently work flows through the system.
Exactly. And to illustrate the importance of bottlenecks, let's imagine a lunch line in an office cafeteria.
Oh, I love a good food analogy. I'm all ears.
So let's say there are 5 stations: soup, meat, vegetables, dessert, and drinks, and cashier. The soup station takes 20 seconds per person. Meat takes 3 seconds. Vegetables take 20. Dessert and drinks take 15 and 10 seconds. And the cashier takes a whole minute.
Okay, I'm picturing it. So we have varying processing times at each station, which already hints at potential bottlenecks.
Now, how many lunches can this setup serve per hour?
That's a good question. It's tempting to start adding up all those times, but I have a feeling there's a simpler way.
You're right. The key is to identify the bottleneck, the slowest point in the system. In this case, it's the cashier, who can only process 60 people per hour.
Ah, I see. No matter how fast the other stations are, they're limited by the cashier's speed.
Exactly. So the bottleneck dictates the overall throughput of the system.
Wow, that's such a powerful insight. It makes me wonder how often we're focusing on improving the wrong parts of a process instead of addressing the real bottleneck.
It happens more often than you might think. We tend to assume that the most complex or time-consuming tasks are the bottlenecks, but that's not always the case. Sometimes a seemingly simple step can be the biggest roadblock.
So in this lunch line scenario, the first step to improving efficiency would be to focus on the cashier.
Precisely. But let's say we can't change the cashier's processing time. Are there any other ways to improve the system without adding more resources?
Let me think. Well, if the cashier's the bottleneck, it doesn't make sense to have the other stations operating at a faster rate.
That's a great observation. You could actually redeploy some staff from those faster stations to other tasks where they are needed more.
So instead of having 5 people working at their maximum speed, we could potentially have 3 people working at a pace that matches the bottleneck and still serve the same number of lunches.
Exactly. You've just demonstrated the principle of balancing a line. It's about ensuring that all stages are operating at a rate that aligns with the bottleneck, avoiding unnecessary capacity and wasted effort.
This is making me reevaluate how work is distributed in my own team. We often try to maximize everyone's output, but what if we're actually creating bottlenecks by pushing work through the system faster than the slowest step can handle it?
That's a key insight. It's not just about individual productivity. It's about optimizing the flow of work through the entire system.
Okay, I'm starting to see the big picture here. But let's say the demand for lunch is higher than what the current system can handle. How could we increase throughput without making major changes?
Well, you could add another cashier. That would double your processing capacity. Or if you can't add another cashier, you could look for ways to make the existing cashier more efficient, maybe by streamlining the payment process or giving them better tools.
So by focusing on the bottleneck, even small improvements can have a significant impact on the overall system.
Exactly. And when we talk about lead time, it's not just about the overall throughput. It's also about the time it takes for an individual to go through the process.
Okay, let's stick with this lunch line analogy for a moment. How long will it take an individual to get their lunch, assuming they go through all 5 stations?
Well, that depends. If they're the very first person in line, they'll breeze through in just over 2 minutes. But as the line gets longer, their wait time increases.
So even if the processing time at each station stays the same, the individual lead time can vary depending on the length of the queue.
Exactly. And let's say instead of a single line, people can move freely between the stations. At first glance, this might seem more flexible, but it can actually lead to longer overall lead time.
Wait, really? How is that possible?
Well, think about what happens at the meat station. It only takes 3 seconds to serve someone there, but the cashier takes a full minute. So even though people are moving quickly through the meat station, they end up piling up at the cashier, creating a bottleneck.
So even though the stations are individually faster, the overall system becomes slower because of that bottleneck.
Exactly. And this highlights the importance of considering not just individual steps, but the entire flow of the process.
This is making me rethink how we design processes. We often focus on optimizing individual tasks. But what if we're inadvertently creating bottlenecks by neglecting the overall flow?
That's a key question to ask. And once you've identified your bottleneck, you can start to address it. Remember, time lost at non-bottleneck stages is often recoverable, so focus on optimizing the bottleneck. This might involve allocating your best resources to that stage, minimizing downtime, or even investing in additional capacity.
So it's about being strategic with our resources and prioritizing the areas that will have the greatest impact on overall efficiency.
Imagine a car assembly line. If adding 4 more wheels per hour means you can produce and sell a whole extra car per hour, wouldn't that investment be worthwhile?
Absolutely. It's about looking beyond the immediate cost and considering the potential gains in throughput and revenue.
Now, let's explore a powerful technique for reducing lead time and improving efficiency. The pull approach. Have you ever heard of this concept?
I've heard the term, but I'm not sure I fully understand how it works in practice. Can you break it down for us?
Imagine a supermarket. Shelves are restocked only when needed, based on customer demand. That's a pull system in action.
So it's about responding to actual needs rather than pushing things through the system regardless of demand.
Exactly. It's the opposite of a push system, where work is constantly being pushed to the next stage, regardless of whether they are ready for it or not.
That reminds me of my email inbox. It's like a push system gone haywire. I'm constantly bombarded with messages, whether I'm ready to deal with them or not.
A perfect example. Pull systems can reduce work in progress, shorten lead times, and even encourage teamwork.
Okay, I'm sold. How do we actually implement a pull system?
There are a few practical methods. One is to use Kanban cards. Imagine a card attached to a bin of parts. When the bin is empty, the card is sent back to the previous stage as a signal to replenish those parts.
So it's a visual signal that triggers a replenishment process only when it's needed.
Exactly. Another approach is to use controlled buffer areas. Imagine a designated space between 2 stages of a process. The upstream stage can only produce items when there's space in the buffer.
So it's like a physical constraint that prevents overproduction and keeps the workflow balanced.
Precisely. Now let's consider another factor that can significantly impact lead time: batch sizes. It often seems more efficient to do things in bulk, but is that always the case?
I've definitely fallen into that trap. Tell me more about the pros and cons of batching.
Well, larger batches can be more efficient in terms of setup time. If it takes an hour to set up a machine for a specific task, it might seem logical to run a large batch to minimize those setup costs. However, this efficiency comes at a price.
Okay, I'm sensing a but coming. What are the downsides?
Large batches lead to increased storage costs, higher risk of obsolescence, and longer lead times. While you might be saving time on setup, you're introducing delays and costs elsewhere in the process.
So it's a classic trade-off. Efficiency in one area can create inefficiencies in others.
Exactly. And often we overestimate the cost savings of large batches and underestimate the hidden costs associated with them.
So how do we find that sweet spot, that balance between efficiency and excess inventory?
Instead of relying on complex formulas to calculate the optimal batch size, focus on reducing setup time. If you can make it quicker and easier to switch between tasks or products, you can reduce batch sizes without sacrificing efficiency.
This is making me rethink how we approach setups. We often view them as necessary evils, but what if we could transform them into opportunities for optimization?
That's the key mindset shift. It's about challenging those assumptions and finding ways to make even the seemingly mundane aspects of a process more efficient.
Wow, this has been an incredibly insightful deep dive so far. We've covered so much ground, from the power of data and SPC to the importance of bottlenecks and pull systems. I'm already starting to see my own work processes in a new light. This feels less like a podcast episode and more like a personalized process improvement crash course.
And we're just getting started. In the next part of our deep dive, we'll explore strategies for improving quality and costs through team projects, and we'll delve deeper into specific techniques for reducing waste and optimizing lead time.
I can't wait. This is definitely a journey. I'm excited to continue. Okay, we're back, ready to dive even deeper into process improvement. In the last part, we talked about measuring the right things, identifying bottlenecks, and streamlining lead times. And I'm really curious about how to involve the whole team in this journey.
That's a great point. Involving your team can lead to remarkable breakthroughs, both for quality and cost savings.
I love that. It just makes sense to involve the people who are actually doing the work. They're the ones that know the processes inside and out.
Exactly. And when you give people a voice, it can be really motivating. It fosters a sense of ownership and pride, leading to more sustainable improvement.
We briefly touched on quality circles earlier. Can you remind me what those are and why they can be so effective?
Quality circles were really revolutionary when they were first introduced back in the 60s. The idea was to bring together a small group of employees from different departments or levels who all had a shared interest in solving a particular problem.
So it's not just the managers coming up with the solutions. It's about getting input from all across the organization.
Right. And it's not just about brainstorming either. Quality circles typically receive training in problem-solving techniques, data analysis, and sometimes even basic statistical tools.
So we're not just throwing them into the deep end. We're giving them the skills and knowledge to analyze the problem and come up with good solutions.
Exactly. They work together to gather data, analyze the root causes, brainstorm potential solutions, and then present their recommendations to management. They even often have data to support their proposed changes.
Okay, so it's a very structured approach to problem solving, using all those diverse perspectives of the team. But I've noticed that quality circles aren't as popular as they used to be. Why is that?
Well, one of the things that emerged later is continuous improvement, or Kaizen. It's a philosophy that encourages everyone to constantly look for ways to make things just a little bit better all the time.
So instead of having those big formal quality circles, we're trying to create a culture where everyone is always looking to improve things.
Exactly. It's about making small, incremental changes that add up to significant improvements over time. I read somewhere that Toyota implements thousands of employee suggestions every week.
Wow, that's incredible. It shows the power of Kaizen. But I imagine it takes a lot of effort to maintain that kind of culture.
Yeah, it does. You need systems in place to support continuous improvement, whether it's regular meetings, suggestion boxes, or even dedicated improvement projects. And visual management techniques can be really helpful for making improvements transparent.
Okay, I like this visual management idea. Can you give me some examples of how that works with Kaizen?
Think about a simple suggestion box where employees can drop their ideas, or a Kanban board where you visually track the progress of tasks and identify bottlenecks. It's really about making the workflow visible and creating a shared understanding of progress and challenges.
That makes sense. It's about bringing those invisible processes out into the open so everyone can see what's working and what needs to be improved.
Right. And Kaizen also emphasizes the importance of standardized work procedures. We talked about this before in the context of reducing variability and lead times. By clearly defining the best way to perform a task, you create a baseline for improvement and reduce errors.
Okay, so it's about setting clear expectations and then empowering everyone to find ways to improve those standards.
Exactly. And all of this requires strong leadership support. It's hard to imagine these initiatives succeeding without leaders who demonstrate a genuine commitment to quality and improvement.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's not enough to just talk about quality. You have to create an environment where people feel empowered to take ownership and make a difference.
Absolutely. Leaders need to provide the resources, the training, the support that teams need. They need to remove barriers and celebrate successes, and really understand that investing in quality and process improvement is smart business.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've talked about empowering teams, creating a culture of continuous improvement, and the importance of leadership. Now, let's dive back into lead time. I'm always looking for more ways to shorten those waiting periods.
Great. Remember those 4 main activities involved in any process: processing, inspection, moving, and storing.
Yeah, you mentioned those last time, and how only processing actually adds value from the customer's perspective.
Right. So when we're talking about reducing lead time, a big part of that is identifying and minimizing those non-value adding activities, particularly in the areas of moving and storing.
Okay, so it's about cutting out unnecessary steps and making the flow of work smoother.
Exactly. And remember those pull systems where work is initiated based on demand rather than being pushed through the system regardless of need. Well, that's a great way to reduce work in progress, which minimizes moving and storing things.
It's like decluttering our workflow and only keeping what we need. I love that.
Exactly. Now, there's also a really helpful concept called Little's Law that can help us understand lead time.
Okay, what's Little's Law?
It's a simple equation that states the average lead time for a process is equal to the average work in progress divided by the average throughput.
So if we have a lot of work in progress but a slow throughput rate, our lead time will be high.
Exactly. And if we can reduce work in progress and increase throughput, our lead time will go down.
This makes me realize that lead time isn't just about how fast we complete tasks. It's about the overall flow of work through the whole system.
Precisely. Little's Law gives us a way to analyze and optimize that flow.
So it's about streamlining the movement of work, reducing bottlenecks, and getting value to the customer faster.
Exactly. Now let's look at some specific techniques for improving lead time. We talked about setup time reduction before, but that has implications for lead time as well.
Oh yeah, I remember the example of the Formula One pit crew changing a tire in seconds. It was amazing to see how they optimized every movement to save time.
Exactly. And while most of us aren't changing tires at breakneck speed, the principle applies.
No.
We often accept long setup times as just inevitable, but what if we challenge that?
So it's about analyzing those setup processes and finding ways to make them faster and smoother.
Right. And by reducing setup time, you can run smaller batches, which reduces lead time and allows more flexibility. It's like being able to switch between recipes in the kitchen without spending hours cleaning and prepping each time.
I'm getting hungry just thinking about that. I see how that flexibility would be huge in any workflow. What are some other techniques for improving lead time?
Well, there is a technique called cellular manufacturing. It involves grouping related work processes together in a dedicated cell, rather than having them spread out across a factory or an office.
So it's like creating mini production lines for specific products or families of products. That makes sense.
Exactly. This reduces transportation time, handoffs between departments, and improves communication. It's like having all the ingredients and tools for a specific recipe within reach.
Okay, great analogy. We talked about setup time and cellular manufacturing. What else can we do?
Well, another important factor is variability. Variability can come from many sources. Variations in processing time, unexpected delays, quality issues that require rework, and even changes in customer demand.
So basically anything that disrupts the smooth flow of work.
Exactly. And variability has this cascading effect. Even small variations at one stage can amplify into larger delays later on.
It's like a domino effect. One little delay can trigger a chain reaction of problems.
Precisely. So reducing variability is essential for good lead time performance.
Okay, that makes sense. But how do we tackle variability? It seems like it's everywhere.
Well, one approach is to implement standard work procedures. By defining clear steps for each task, you can minimize those variations in processing time and reduce errors. It's like having a recipe that everyone follows to make sure the cake comes out the same every time.
Okay, I like that analogy. So it's about creating a playbook so everyone can ensure consistency and predictability.
Exactly. Another strategy is to improve quality. Remember how we talked about the costs associated with defects and rework? Well, those quality issues impact cost and lead time.
So it's a double whammy. We're spending time fixing problems instead of moving forward.
Exactly. By reducing defects and rework, you create a smoother workflow. It's about getting things right the first time.
I like the sound of that.
Yeah.
So we've talked about reducing variability through standard work and improving quality. What else can we do?
Visual management is another good tool. This involves using visual cues like charts, graphs, and even color coding to make information about the process easy to understand.
Oh, I love visual management. It's so much easier to grasp information when you can see it visually.
Exactly. Instead of relying on spreadsheets and reports, you can see the workflow at a glance. This can help identify bottlenecks, track progress, and spot potential problems early on.
Okay, so it's about making the invisible visible.
Now, we can't forget technology. From automation and robotics to scheduling software and real-time data analytics, technology can really transform things.
Technology has certainly changed how we work, It seems like there's an app for everything these days.
That's true. And while technology can be really helpful, it's important to remember that it's just a tool. You still need to understand process improvement to use those tools effectively.
Yeah, good point. It's not about blindly implementing technology, it's about using it strategically.
Right. And remember, lead time reduction is a journey, not a destination. By constantly looking for ways to improve flow, reduce waste, and optimize your processes, you can unlock huge gains in efficiency, productivity, and customer satisfaction.
This has been really eye-opening. We covered the impact of variability, the power of pull systems, visual management, and the role of technology.
Yeah.
I'm feeling inspired to take action.
That's great to hear. And in the final part of our deep dive, we'll shift our focus to improving quality and cost through team projects. We'll explore concepts like quality circles, Kaizen, and employee empowerment in more detail.
I can't wait. This is the journey I'm really excited to continue. Okay, we're back for the final part of our process improvement deep dive. After our last conversation about lead time, I feel totally energized. We covered so much, tackling bottlenecks, visual management, all that good stuff. And I'm really curious about how we can use teamwork to improve quality and save money at the same time.
I love that energy. You're right. Getting your team involved is really important for creating a culture of continuous improvement. It's about recognizing that everyone has good ideas, not just the people at the top.
Absolutely. Like they say, the best ideas come from the front lines. But how do we actually, put that into practice? Last time we touched on quality circles, but I'd love to dig into that a bit more. How do they really work?
Okay, so think of a quality circle, like a small task force focused on one specific problem or opportunity. You get volunteers from different departments and levels, anyone who's connected to that area.
So it's not just the same old group, it's a mix of people with all different backgrounds and experiences.
Exactly. And here's the key. The quality circle gets training, problem-solving techniques, data analysis, even some basic statistical tools. We're not just asking for opinions, we're helping them really understand the issue and come up with solutions based on data.
So it's like we're giving them a toolkit and letting them be process improvement detectives. I love that. So once they've got their detective hats on, what happens?
Well, they get to work. They gather data, figure out the root causes of the problem, brainstorm solutions, and then, this is important, they present their recommendations to management, often with, data to back up their ideas.
So it's about giving them a voice, letting them share their ideas and say, hey, we think we can do this better. And hopefully management's listening.
Yeah. It's a two-way street. Management needs to empower the team to put those solutions into action and then track how things are going, closing the loop, creating ownership for the whole process.
This reminds me of Kaizen, that continuous improvement philosophy.
Yeah.
Are quality circles and Kaizen related?
Yeah, you could say that. Quality circles are good for specific problems, while Kaizen is about that mindset of always trying to make things better,
So quality circles are like sprints, focused on a specific goal. Kaizen is a marathon, consistently improving over time.
That's a great way to put it. Both can be really effective if you put in the effort and have support from leadership.
Okay, that all makes sense, but I'm wondering about the practical side. How do you actually create a culture where people feel comfortable speaking up and sharing their ideas? It's easy to say empower your team, but how do you actually do that?
Well, it starts with leadership. Actions speak louder than words. Leaders need to show that they're really committed to quality and improvement.
Okay, what does that look like?
It's about creating a safe space, where people feel comfortable sharing their ideas, even if those ideas challenge the way things are currently done. It's being open to feedback, trying new things.
So it's not just about having a suggestion box. It's about really asking for feedback, listening to concerns, and appreciating those who contribute.
Exactly. And it's about giving them the resources, the training, the support they need.
Investing in your people and making continuous improvement everyone's job.
You got it. And remember, process improvement is a journey. There will be bumps along the way, but if you're always learning and improving, you can make amazing progress.
This has been so eye-opening. We've covered so much. Data-driven decisions, lead times, teamwork. I feel like I have a new way of looking at my work.
It's been great diving deep with you. And remember, the most important thing is to just get started. Pick one area you want to improve, get the data, involve your team, and don't be afraid to try new things.
And to all our listeners, we want to hear about your process improvement journey. What's one thing you're going to try based on what we talked about? Let us know on social media. We're here to cheer you on. Thanks for diving deep with us.